Ever just like open a bottle of wine and wonder how people figured this whole thing out?
Yeah.
Like how far back does it even go?
Right.
That's what we're diving into today.
It's a long history.
It really is.
Yeah.
A long and fascinating history.
Yeah.
We're taking a deep dive into ancient wine,
Awesome.
specifically what they knew back then,
Oh,
how they made it,
right.
and how it shaped their world,
Uh-huh.
all through the lens of this super cool article
Okay.
from Wines Uncovered.
Right.
It's called Ancient Wine Production Techniques, Unveiling the Secrets of the Past.
I like it.
Me too.
Catchy.
Yeah. And it's got some incredible insights that really like make you think differently about wine.
Yeah.
So it starts off with a too long didn't read section, which, you know, I love a good TLDR. I know, right? Gets right to the point.
Yep.
So get this.
Yeah.
We're talking about evidence of wine production.
Mm-hmm.
That's over 7,000 years old.
Wow.
I know. That's older than the Egyptian pyramids.
That is old.
Isn't that crazy?
That's amazing.
7,000 years.
Wow.
And it wasn't just some random experiment either.
Right.
The article says that early civilizations were already using surprisingly sophisticated methods back then,
Ooh.
some of which still echo in modern winemaking,
Interesting.
which I think is super cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Like they were really figuring things out back then.
Yeah, for a long time we thought that places like Italy and Greece were like the pioneers of winemaking.
Of course.
But it turns out the story goes back even further.
Okay.
And it's far more widespread than we ever imagined.
Okay, now you've got me really intrigued.
Okay.
Where are we talking about? Spill the ancient wine secrets.
One of the oldest finds is in a cave in Armenia,
Okay.
the Armenia cave.
Okay.
And this dates back to 4100 BCE.
Wow.
Archaeologists unearthed pottery shards with grape residue,
Wow.
so confirming they were definitely making wine there.
Talk about a serious vintage.
All right.
A cave in Armenia, who knew?
And it wasn't just Armenia.
Why?
Georgia, Iran,
Right.
Sumer, Egypt.
Wow.
All these ancient civilizations were on the wine game
Wow.
early on.
So this wasn't just like a one-off kind of thing. This
No.
is like a whole widespread.
It tells us something really important
Yeah.
about humanity's relationship
Uh-huh.
with this beverage.
Okay.
See, wine wasn't just a drink back then. It played a crucial role
Okay.
in the development of agriculture
Okay.
and the rise of civilizations.
Okay. I need you to unpack that for me.
Okay,
How does wine tie into the dawn of civilization?
so think about it.
Okay.
Wine comes from grapes,
Yeah?
and grapes need to be cultivated.
Right.
So the domestication of wild grapes,
Yeah?
particularly the Vitis vinifera species,
Uh-huh.
which is the ancestor of most wine grapes today,
Okay.
happened alongside the development of agriculture itself.
Whoa. So that glass of Pinot Noir I enjoyed last night is a direct link
It is.
to our ancestors settling down
Okay.
and starting farms.
Yeah.
That's way cooler than just saying grapes were domesticated.
Way cooler.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so as these societies grew,
Yes.
so did this wine culture.
It did, and especially with the help of some ancient wine influencers, if you will.
Okay, I need to hear about these ancient wine influencers. What are you talking about?
The Phoenicians.
The Phoenicians.
Incredible seafarers and traders.
Right.
And as they navigated the Mediterranean,
Uh-huh.
they brought their love for wine
Yeah.
and then know how to make it
Right.
to other parts of the world,
Okay.
influencing places like Greece and Rome.
Wow. And so it spread from there.
And it spread from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if wine wasn't just about,
Right.
getting a good buzz,
Right.
what else was it about?
So wine was deeply intertwined with religion, medicine,
Uh-huh.
social status,
Okay.
even politics, you could say.
Wow.
It was a cultural currency.
Mm.
Think of Dionysus,
Okay.
the Greek god of wine
Right.
and festivity,
Right.
or his Roman counterpart Bacchus.
Right.
They weren't just associated with a good time.
Yeah.
They represented something sacred and transformative.
Interesting, like how we have certain drinks for certain occasions, like
Right.
champagne for celebrations,
Exactly.
whiskey for contemplation.
Precisely, but the rituals associated with wine
Uh-huh.
go back even further,
Okay.
predating Islam
Wow.
and throughout the development of Christianity.
Wow.
Think about communion wine.
Right.
That tradition alone speaks volumes about how deeply ingrained wine was in ancient societies.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered how important wine was to ancient cultures.
Yeah.
But how did they actually make it? Without all the fancy equipment and temperature-controlled everything we have today.
It's pretty cool, actually. They were working with observation,
Yeah.
experimentation,
Uh-huh.
and probably a fair share of happy accidents, too.
I like those happy accident moments in the history.
It's how we got here.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what were they doing?
Yeah, the article talks about how some of those early techniques
Uh-huh.
actually laid the groundwork for how some wines are still made today.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so, like, break it down for me.
Okay.
They've got grapes. They want wine.
Yeah.
What are the basic steps here?
Well, believe it or not, the actual fermentation process
Uh-huh.
is surprisingly simple.
Okay.
Essentially, all you need are grapes
Okay.
and yeast.
Yeast. That's not exactly like a new invention. I remember learning in school that yeast is everywhere,
Exactly.
even floating around in the air.
And on grape skin.
Oh, right, of course.
So imagine those ancient vintners crushing the grapes,
Okay.
often with their feet.
Wait, they were stomping grapes
They
with
were.
their feet.
It's true.
Okay, and is that still a thing?
It is.
People are still stomping grapes.
For some wines, yes.
That's amazing.
Right.
It's both amazing and a little weird.
A little bit.
But I mean, hey, if it works, it works.
It's a very gentle way to release the juice
That's true.
without crushing the seeds, which can make the wine bitter.
Right.
But anyway, I digress.
Okay, back to the stomping.
Well, not the stomping.
Okay.
Back to the fermentation process.
Okay.
So those naturally occurring yeast on the grape skins
Mm-hmm.
would mix with the juice, and boom,
Yeah.
fermentation begins.
There it is.
The yeast basically throws a party,
Okay.
feeding on the sugars in the grape juice,
Mm-hmm.
and producing alcohol as a byproduct.
Ethanol.
Ethanol, yes.
So they didn't need fancy labs or anything back then.
They didn't.
Just let nature do its thing.
They relied on the power of nature.
I like it.
Yeah,
The original fermentation hackers.
I like that.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay, so fermentation, that's just the first step, right?
it is.
They needed something to store the wine in after
They did.
those giant clay pots I've seen in museums.
You're talking about amphora.
Amphorae. Yes,
And you're right, those weren't just decorative vases.
Okay.
Those were essential for storing and transporting wine.
Okay.
And get this,
Okay.
they would seal them with resin.
Resin.
Resin,
What, like tree sap resin?
Yep, the same stuff.
Wow. Okay. And that's safe to drink.
Well, they thought so,
Okay.
but it also sometimes imparted a unique flavor
Interesting.
of the wine.
Is that where Retsina comes from?
It is.
That Greek wine.
I got it.
That piney flavor.
Retsina is a Greek wine that still uses resin
Oh, wow.
in the production process today.
So it's like the ancient equivalent of like oak barrels,
Exactly.
which add those vanilla and spice notes to wine.
You got it.
Okay, so we've talked about fermentation.
Yeah.
We've talked about storage.
Right.
What about the grapes themselves?
Yeah.
Were they working with the same varieties back then?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of how winemaking has evolved.
Okay.
They were mostly using Vitis vinifera, which is the same species that makes up the vast majority of wine grapes
Okay.
that we drink today.
Wow. So this one species of grape
Wing species,
is responsible for pretty much the entire world of wine as we know it.
pretty much.
Wow.
Yeah. And here's the even cooler part.
Okay.
Within that one species,
Uh-huh.
Vitis vinifera,
Okay.
there are over 10,000 varieties.
10,000 varieties
At least.
from this one species.
Think about all the different types of wine we have today.
Wow.
From light and crisp Sauvignon Blancs
Mhm.
to rich and jammy Zinfandels.
Right.
Those are all expressions of that single species,
Wow.
just like ancient wines were.
So even back then, they had a lot of options
They did.
for crafting different styles of wine.
Absolutely. And they were already figuring out that different grapes have different characteristics.
Okay, like what?
Like tannins.
Tannins.
Yeah. Have you ever noticed how when you drink black tea and your mouth feels a little
A little dry.
dry,
Yeah.
astringent?
Yes.
That's tannins.
Okay, so that's in wine too.
That's in wine too.
Oh, okay.
And some grapes, like Cabernet Sauvignon,
Okay.
are naturally high in tannins,
Okay.
which is why those wines can age for decades.
Huh.
Others, like Pinot Noir,
Okay.
have thinner skins and fewer tannins,
Okay.
so they produce lighter-bodied wines.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I never knew that's what that was.
The ancients may not have known about tannins specifically,
Okay.
but they understood that certain grapes made bolder, more robust wines,
Mm-hmm.
while others were lighter and fruitier.
Interesting. So just like how we pick different wines for different occasions today.
Precisely.
Or food pairings.
Exactly.
Okay, so they had a pretty good understanding of this stuff.
They had a surprisingly sophisticated understanding.
Wow, that's really cool. So we've seen how they made wine back then,
Mm-hmm.
and it's honestly more impressive than I imagined.
Yeah.
But I keep thinking about,
Yeah.
was wine just for like special occasions back then?
That's a great question.
Like, was it a rare treat, or
Yeah.
was it more like a part of everyday life?
It really gets to the heart of how wine shaped ancient societies.
Okay.
It wasn't just about the drinking.
Okay.
It was a form of trade,
Uh-huh.
a status symbol,
Okay.
even like a diplomatic tool, you could say.
Oh, okay.
The article goes into this
Yeah.
in the trade, transport, and consumption patterns section. And it's fascinating stuff.
Okay, so like what kind of patterns are we talking about here?
So remember those amphorae,
The clay pots.
those giant clay pots?
Yeah.
Those weren't just for storage.
Okay.
They were also shipping containers of the ancient world.
So they were sending these things
Right, yeah.
across the Mediterranean.
Imagine like ancient cargo ships just loaded down with these amphorae
Full of wine.
full of wine.
Yeah. Sailing all over.
Oh, yeah. And it wasn't just local trade.
Okay.
Wine was flowing all over the Mediterranean,
Wow.
with certain regions becoming famous for their unique wines.
So like their own versions of a French Bordeaux
Exactly.
or an Italian Chianti.
It's amazing to think that something we now associate with like specific modern day regions had this whole other life
Right.
traveling the ancient world.
It's like a thread
Yeah.
connecting us back to those ancient cultures.
And for the people back then, receiving a shipment of like fine wine from a distant land,
Yeah.
it wasn't just about the taste.
Okay.
It was a sign of wealth, sophistication,
Okay.
connection to the wider world.
So like how people today collect those rare wines,
Exactly.
it's a status symbol.
A status symbol for sure.
Okay, so beyond the trade aspect,
Yeah.
how did people actually consume their wine? Was it all togas and banquets?
I mean, the banquets were definitely a thing,
Okay.
especially in places like Rome,
Yeah.
where wine was a staple
Uh-huh.
at feasts and celebrations.
Right.
But it wasn't just about getting tipsy or anything.
Okay.
The ancients believed
Yeah.
different wines had different properties, even medicinal ones.
Oh, so like how some people today might drink herbal tea for certain ailments?
Exactly.
Okay, interesting.
And what fascinates me is that even back then,
Yeah.
people had distinct preferences.
Okay.
Some liked sweeter wines,
Uh-huh.
others liked them drier.
Right?
Certain regions were known for their robust reds,
Right.
while others were famous for lighter whites.
So basically, humans have had diverse tastes in wine for thousands of years.
It seems like it.
Which I love.
It makes you wonder what those ancient winemakers would think
Right.
of the wines we have today.
Would they be impressed?
Yeah.
Or would they think we've gone too far?
Right.
It's really cool to think about.
It really is. It makes you realize
Yeah.
this drink,
Yeah.
which we often take for granted,
Right.
has been a source of fascination,
Yeah.
innovation,
Yeah.
cultural exchange for millennia.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening.
Yeah.
We've gone from those early discoveries in a cave in Armenia
Right.
to sprawling trade routes across the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
From simple fermentation techniques to complex social customs.
All thanks to wine.
All thanks to wine.
Pretty amazing.
Really makes you appreciate that next sip.
It does.
Knowing that it's the culmination of thousands of years of human ingenuity.
And passion.
And passion. I love that.
Yeah.
If you're as captivated by the world of ancient wine as I am, be sure to check out the full article
Yeah.
on Wines Uncovered.
It's a great read.
It really is. Until next time, cheers to the fascinating journey from ancient vines to your glass.